What is up, fellas, and welcome to a special episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. Today, I am finally getting around to remaking the video where I call out Dan on his video, Dedunking the Predynastic Vases. Dan has issued a retraction on this video. I am aware of that. However, his retraction exclusively applies to his statements about them fudging the digital scan data. He made very clear that he stands by all of the other statements he made in that video and still agrees with his overall conclusion. So that's what I'm going to be looking at today, is the other statements he makes and see if any of them hold up at all. If you like this video, do make sure to subscribe, because this is just part one in a little mini series I'm going to be doing. I don't know how many there will be, but this Sunday I also plan on tackling Night Scarab's first video, debunking the vases. If there's any other good videos out there debunking the vases that you guys want me to address, let me know down in the comments. I'll check them out and I'll add them to the list. But let's go ahead and get into the content for this video. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it and start playing what Dan has to say. Let's go ahead and take a listen here. Just a second. Here we go.
Handles are parallel within the width of a couple of human hairs.
That's not what the dial indicators show. My dad's a retired machinist, so he loaned me a dial indicator. He uses them all the time. And basically the way that these things work is each point on this thing is a half of a thousandth. The fives and the tens and whatnot are the 5 and 10 thousandths. When you press the needle, it goes up or down. Bends in this video will be preloaded, where basically they'll push the thing in partially, and then they'll turn this knob up here to 0. So by zeroing it out that way, then when it goes up or down, you can measure the disparity either direction, so that it's not just measuring the difference in one direction. And so keep an eye closely as we go forward, because we're going to be watching a lot of these things turning, and you need to know what you're looking at. Now,
hopefully you caught all that, because that's very important for what we're about to see next.
See how the second handle's reading slowly moves across the dial. Now look closely here. There's more than a single thousandth. It's far off from the 0 reading that they got on the other handle. There's no question that the handles are not symmetrical, but the scan with all the missing data points said that they were.
So the claim that Dan is making here is, you could see that needle spins all the way around. It does a full rotation. So Ben is claiming that it's reading 1 or 2 thousandths off of perfection. And Dan is saying that's not accurate. It spun all the way around. So it's actually reading almost 30 thousandths of an inch off of perfection. Well, that isn't the case. And I'm pretty sure Dan is outright lying here. You see, as Dan had explained just a few seconds earlier, what you're seeing here is they are pre-depressing that needle down on one lug handle on one side of the vase. And then as it rotates, that indicator comes off of the first lug handle, the needle undepresses and spins around. And then as the vase rotates all the way back to the other side and it comes back into contact with that vase again, it's spinning back around to where it was zeroed on the other lug handle. I'm going to actually play this in slow motion for you guys so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, because Dan's edited it very tightly here, so it's tough to pick up. But I'm going to play it in 25 speed here, and pay attention to where this is and when the needle is actually moving. At the very start of the clip, it's not even in contact with the vase. When it comes into contact with the vase, that's when it does the full rotation and returns to where it had been zeroed on the other lug handle on the other side of the vase. And if you're still doubting me, oh, I messed up. I wasn't showing you that at all. I apologize. All right, well, I will show that again in slow motion here. I'll let it replay a couple of times. My bad, fellas, technical difficulties. But you see here, this is starting not even in contact with the vase. And then that's when this moves, when this comes back into contact with the vase. So right here, oh, go back. Right there, you see it is not even in contact with the vase. And that's when the needle moves, is when it comes back into contact with the vase. So if you're doubting what I'm saying here, and you still think that Dan is right, and that it actually is reading 30 thousandths of an inch, well, I have a couple other clips for you. I have a couple other clips to show you. These are from the videos that Dan linked underneath in his description on his video. This is the first video that Dan linked, and it's showing them zeroing it out on one side. It pops off the handle, the needle jumps up, and then as it comes back into contact with the other handle, it goes back to zero, exactly as I was just describing. And they show this again in the first video that Dan linked. That clip is in that video twice. And then they show it again in the third or second video that Dan linked. So this is the third time they're showing it in the second video that Dan linked in his own description, showing exactly what I'm describing. It goes back to zero when it comes back into contact with the other handle. And then they showed it a fourth time in the third video that Dan linked in his description. So in order for this to have been a mistake, there's the fourth video, meant to share that tab. So in order for this to be a mistake on Dan's part, he would have had to have watched that clip that he included in his video, edited out of Ben's video, cut out that beginning part where they are zeroing it on the handle. Coincidentally, that clip that Dan included, I'm having a tough time keeping Dan and Ben's names straight in my head right now, but that clip that Dan included is not in any of the videos he linked in his description, and I imagine that's intentional, because if you were to find that clip, it would show you exactly what I just showed you, where they're zeroing it out on one handle, turning the vase, and then the needle jumps when it comes back into contact with the second handle. Dan had to edit that out of his clip and edit it very tightly so that you could just enough so you could see that little indicator moving around, spinning around, but barely able to see that what you're actually seeing is it's coming back into contact with the vase after being zeroed out on the other handle. Dan explained that he understands this very well. He works with these dial indicators. He had to watch Ben's videos. He had to edit Ben's videos. I find it very, very hard to believe that this is an honest mistake made by Dan. And if it is an honest mistake, reputationally, you might be better off just saying it's a lie, because it's the kind of mistake that shouldn't ever happen. And you're using this mistake, this lie, to call them liars. You are accusing them of lying about and misrepresenting the data that they are collecting. This is separate from the digital scan data. We've already addressed the digital scan data. He issued a retraction for that. This is the physical measurements that he is also accusing them of lying about. So let's go on and let's continue to listen to what else Dan has to say in this video. Let me make sure I am sharing it with you guys as well. There we go. Okay.
So most of these are close enough. I mean, the lug handles are the one area where we see a really big disparity in the measurement.
As I just pointed out, you don't see that at all. Dan is making up that disparity. It doesn't actually exist.
Between the scan data and the dial indicators. As a matter of fact, we do see some really tight tolerances on some of this stuff. You have to admit that this is really, really good work. I can't argue with the fact that this would be considered precision if it was handmade or made on an old school lathe, but does it measure up to modern day machining standards?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Dan, because I have the answer, and the answer is a resounding yes. Yes, it does. This video right here was recorded and published before you uploaded your video, Dan. And this here is Ben measuring a modern marble vase. You can see that the needle is moving around a little bit on here. And this is a modern marble vase that was turned on a modern precision lathe. Okay. And you can see that it still has deviations measuring in a couple thousandths of an inch. This is a much softer material and a much easier design than the ancient vases, because this doesn't have any lug handles on it. So this entire thing could have been turned on a lathe, and it was turned on a modern high-tech lathe. And here you can actually see them comparing the numbers of the marble vase. These are the measurements you got from the marble vase, and these are the measurements from the ancient predynastic vases. As you can see, pretty much every single vase they've measured is as good or better than the modern marble vase turned on a modern high-tech lathe. This vase in particular, the thin vase, is considerably better. So maybe not considerably, but definitely noticeably. So the question of, does this measure up to modern machining standards, is yes, it absolutely does. They are very directly comparable and actually better than modern machining standards in this example. And there are funerary urns. On Sunday, I'm going to be addressing Night Scarab's video, and in it, part of his video is him measuring a modern granite funerary urn made on a modern high-tech computerized lathe from China. It had the exact same type of precision, very directly comparable with that modern vase and the predynastic ancient vases. So the answer is an absolute yes, Dan. It does compare, and it even slightly exceeds it. But let's go back and listen to what else Dan has to say.
Well, those of you who've worked around precision lathes or in machine shops and stuff will have almost certainly noticed something when we were watching those dial indicators go up and down. Look closely right here.
With a run out of around 8 to 10 thousandths of an inch in spots, and the majority being 3 to 4 thousandths.
Where you can tell the tough material and they came in and
There's little flicks.
I'm going to move my gauge down so it touches, and I'm going to zero it out. So I'm putting 0 where the needle is right now. And I'm going to just spin it and see how crooked it is. It's not bad at all.
I'd like to point out that this gauge is in increments of 10. So every little line here is double the little lines on the other gauges we've been looking at. So its distance from 0 is less, but this is reading about 5 thousandths of an inch, right around what the vase was reading as well.
Oh, I can see it goes out right here. You won't be able to get it perfect if it's a rough piece, but once you do a pass on it, you could retry it and it'll be much smoother and you'll be able to get it dialed in.
Oh, that is, I am doing this live, and I am, I'm working off his video, so sorry about that, Ed. That was a risk of the process. So now it's almost perfect. That's very.
This
very
is the
impressive.
kind of precision we don't see on a lathe used to make working parts. It's the kind of precision that we see used on a lathe made to, say, turn a vase.
So everything that Dan is about to say from this point forward is a complete and total straw man. You just heard him starting it there. He's comparing modern machined parts for, working parts that require extreme precision, and showing a video of someone showing off just how smooth they can get something on their modern high-tech lathe, and then drawing a comparison to the vases, saying the vases aren't as precise. And, well, why would they be? They're vases. The vases are perfect to human touch, to human sight, and perfectly balanced. They don't need to be any more perfect than this. And Dan, like I said, everything he is going to say from this point forward is just a ridiculous straw man. So I'm going to let him talk, and then I'll continue addressing the ridiculous statements he makes as he makes them. But also, I would like to point out that he's drawing attention to those rapid flicks. Everything that he's saying for the next several minutes is also focused on those rapid flicks. He puts so many straw man arguments in there, it gets easy to get lost in the sauce, but he's still talking. He's started talking about those rapid flicks, and he's continuing to talk about those. This is relevant because it just goes to show how little understanding Dan actually has of anything he's talking about. So
here is a lathe that's being used to make a stone vase in the modern day. Now, where the lathe grabs onto the material that it's cutting is called the chuck. That area has a lot of wobble in this because it doesn't need to be precise. Compare that to this metal cutting lathe. Notice that the chuck has no wobble. It doesn't have any play. It doesn't move at all. One of these will give you a dial indicator reading that goes up and down as you go around the object. The other one will give you a perfectly flat reading as you go around. One would be modern day precision. The other one would be, looks pretty good.
So, so he's about to directly say it, but he's obviously implying that the vases, the predynastic vases, are a product of a lathe like he just showed. That is so just unbelievably stupid. Recall this this chart that I showed you earlier. Sorry, my chicken alarm is going off. Let me dismiss that. There we go. Okay, so that modern marble vase that was turned on a modern high-tech lathe has the exact same wobble as these, and actually more wobble than the predynastic vases. The funerary granite urn, the granite funerary urn that was also turned on a modern high-speed computerized precision lathe had the exact same range of deviation in it as the modern vase, as the marble vase. Okay, so this argument that he's making that the pre-dynastic ancient vases would be a product of that joke of a lathe that he's showing, it's just bullshit. It's complete and total bullshit. 100% complete and total bullshit. Those modern lathes produced those modern vases with the exact same levels of deviation within the same ranges, right? Again, the pre-dynastic vases are actually slightly better, but Dan, with a straight face, is about to tell you that those vases were made by that janky old lathe. Absolutely idiotic. DeDumbking Dan needs a new nickname. Maybe DeDumbKing, because he is the king of the dumbs. I mean, that is impressively stupid, Dan. Really, truly impressively stupid. Let's continue to listen to what he has to say.
So while there's no question in my mind that this was turned on a lathe, it wasn't a very precise one, certainly not by modern standards. And 5-point CNC and milling and all that stuff, that's just out. There's
yet another bold declarative statement with absolutely nothing to back it up. So why is CNC and 5-axis milling out, Dan? You don't provide any reasoning behind your statement, but I'm willing to guess it's because you mistakenly believe that a 5-axis CNC machine is more accurate and more precise than a lathe. Again, showing your complete and total lack of understanding of even basic concepts that you're discussing here. A lathe requires two things for precision: rotation around an axis and a fixed cutting point. That's all it requires. If you have those two things, you can achieve near perfect, like genuine perfection levels of perfect, okay? You can have precision down to the atomic level in theory with those two things. That's all you need with a lathe. With a 5-axis CNC machine, there's so many moving parts. There's so many introduction points for error that their ability for precision is far less than a lathe. And in fact, the standard level of precision for a 5-axis CNC machine is about 5/1000ths of an inch, exactly what you're seeing with all of these vases. So why is that just out, Dan? You don't provide any reasoning, but you do sound silly saying it. Let's continue listening.
There's no computerized perfection in here whatsoever. Now, Ben explains this with the variation in the stuff that makes up the granite itself. You know, there's inclusions, he says, and these cause the variations in the cutting and the tooling and whatnot.
As mentioned in the clip, and as you might have seen in some of the other gauge movements, in particular location, the gauge dial suddenly spikes a few thousandths, 3, 4, or 5, very quickly, before returning to what you might call a more normalized sweep range just as quickly. We discussed this during the inspections, and there are a couple possibilities, as it only seems to occur in very small spots in the material when the indicator tip runs over them. The first possibility is damage. Another possibility is that it's due to the nature of granite itself, and a chunk of material, a quartz inclusion, for example, was ripped out in the machining process, forming a small divot, or it wasn't cut cleanly relative to the other softer material in the granite.
But
so remember, Dan is still talking about those rapid flicks in the needle, just something to keep in the back of your head here. But Ben just provided 2 answers as to why you might see those rapid flicks. And the first one makes perfect sense to me. These vases are over 5,000 years old. The idea that they would have some scratches and some dings on them, it seems a lot less likely that they wouldn't, you know. So makes sense to me. Those rapid flicks you see are from scratches and damage that has accumulated over 5,000 years. The second explanation that Ben provided was a very diplomatic one, because if you ask Ben, he'll tell you that he believes these were machined to perfection, but he suggests that maybe during the machining process, because granite has different materials in it, very hard materials like quartz, maybe one of those quartz chunks got caught by a cutting edge and got yanked out of the granite, creating a little imperfection and leading to those spikes. Now, let's listen to how Dan addresses this, and let's just listen to what Dan has to say. Gets wild, fellas.
There's occlusions on the precision granite tabletop that he knows is perfectly smooth that he's working on right there. There's inclusions in it. They were able to smooth those out to thousandth of an inch. They could easily have done the same on this vase if they needed to, or if they were using the proper tools that could.
Wow, what a straw man. So he just fully ignores the fact that these are 5,000 years old, and the most likely explanation is that they are 5,000 years old. Let's just completely ignore that and act like that didn't happen. But then, you know, he goes, it's hard to even make sense of what he's saying here because it's just so nonsensical. He's comparing these vases, which are round and were turned on a lathe, except that these vases couldn't have been at least entirely turned on a lathe because they have the lug handles on them. So he's comparing a complex shape that can't even be turned on a lathe to a flat surface plate. A surface plate is the foundation of modern precision. Without surface plates, none of our industrial world would exist. None of our modern precision would exist. It is what you derive all other precision from. A surface plate, typically granite, is the smoothest, flattest surface that us modern humans can reasonably achieve, and is the standard of precision and flatness. So he is demanding that these 5,000-year-old vases be as smooth and as flat as a surface plate, or else they're invalid or something. I don't really, it's such a ridiculous straw man. I really don't even know what it is that Dan's trying to say here. It's just completely and utterly ridiculous. And he's still saying all this with a straight face. Let's continue listening. Surely it can't get worse.
But they didn't. It's quite obvious. The up and down play is the kind of thing you only get from a lathe with a little bit of wobble. That's the only way you're going to get that.
So again, remember, he's talking about those rapid flicks. That has been the context that has been set for all of this, is those rapid flicks. Those rapid flicks are not explained by a low-quality lathe whatsoever. Again, just displaying Dan's complete and utter lack of understanding of basic concepts that he's discussing here. Though what you would see from a low-quality lathe is exactly what we've seen in all of these vases, the marble vase, the modern marble vase, the old ancient granite vases, all of them. They have the needle going back and forth. The lower quality the lathe, the more that needle is going to move, but it's still going to be a steady back and forth. It's not going to be those random flicks. Those random flicks are from damage. Those random flicks are from whether they be machining damage that occurred at the time of machining or from 5,000 years of existence. That's from damage. That's from a scratch, from a crack, from a little piece being chipped out. That's what those little flicks are. That's what we're still talking about. And he's, again, suggesting that these are the product of a low-quality lathe. I bring you back to that chart that I showed you earlier. Okay? If these are a product of a low-quality lathe, does that mean that our lathes today are low quality because this marble vase was produced by a precision, high quality modern lathe. You can check out the Night Scarab video if you want a direct reference for the measurements, but they measured, again, a modern funerary urn made of granite coming from China from a modern, high quality computerized lathe. It had the exact same types of deviations. So do we have high technology today? Is our technology, what Dan is saying is just bullshit. It's just complete and total bullshit. I don't, and it's really a shame because Dan has built up quite the reputation for himself. And so when he just confidently spouts this bullshit with absolutely nothing to back it up, people actually believe him. They trust him because he's built up quite the reputation, and he's taking advantage of that reputation and using it to slander people and defame these people. He called them liars. Yes, he retracted one count of calling them liars, but you saw him call them liars on the caliper data, not the caliper data, but the dial indicator data as well. And people believe him. He's an outright liar and speaking completely and totally out of his ass, but people believe him. It's a real shame. I think there's a little bit more that Dan has to say. That might be the end of it. Let me check here.
Where is it? Right there. Sure.
So, yeah, this is the surface plate. And
Maybe I can get right down on the level here.
these two hairs are about the
Yeah, I do now,
level
yeah.
of deviation
Yeah.
that you see in the ancient Egyptian vases. So,
So that's
the
a
entire surface,
2,000,
that's the amount of
Right.
imperfection that
Right.
you
Another gap.
and then you
1 to 2
do it without the hair,
And it's just, yeah.
the gauge
Nope.
is dead level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they had the granite spinning on a perfect axis and they put the exact same amount of pressure on it with the polishing agent, they could smooth it out to a perfect degree. It wouldn't be wobbling up and down like what we see. Straight up, it's just a product of a low quality lathe.
So, more straw manning. Okay, why didn't they do that to the modern marble vase? Why don't we do that to the modern granite funerary urns? Why do they have the same level of deviation? It's because they're vases. They don't need to be taken to that level of perfection. And where is this arbitrary standard coming from? It's not coming from Ben. Yes, he uses the word perfect, but he's showing you the exact measurements of these vases. To him, that is perfect, because for a vase, that is perfect. They're perfect to touch. They're perfect to sight. They're perfectly balanced. For every metric that you would measure a vase by, they are perfect. So I don't know what this totally arbitrary standard you're trying to set here is, Dan. It's completely ridiculous. It makes you look like a fool. And yeah, if they are, period, just the product of a low quality lathe, then so is that modern marble vase turned on a fancy, shiny metal lathe today. And so is that funerary urn that is on a computerized, fancy, modern metal lathe today. Like, you make your reputation. You have made your reputation and your career calling people out for this type of behavior. And you're a huge hypocrite, Dan. You're a massive hypocrite. I mean, this was a terrible, terrible video. You didn't speak a single word of truth in it. I skipped the parts that you retracted. Well, those were obviously untrue. You retracted them. And the only part I didn't cover is where you break down the numbers, the numerology. I'm not interested in that. I don't care if you're right or not. It's not my, but literally everything else you say in this video is either an outright lie or it's just bullshit. It's just made up. And, when I called you out for this the first time, you chose not to address any of the criticisms I made, any of the factual criticisms. You accused me of slander and you made personal attacks on me going, oh, no one cares about your small channel. Well, you should care, Dan, because you of all people should care. Your entire reputation has been built on calling people out for this. You should really care. And the fact that you're going around and schmoozing up to all these people that you've slandered now, you're doing guest appearances with them. I don't know. It seems pretty gross to me considering you still have this video up on your channel, still spreading these lies, these disgusting lies. You're trying to befriend these people now while you still have these gross lies about them up on the internet. Yeah. So do better, Dan. Please do better. What do you fellas think? Did I properly debunk Dan's dedunking? It was pretty easy to do, in my opinion. Like I said, he literally didn't say a single thing that was true. So hopefully, if you were swayed by Dan's garbage, you're not anymore. And if you did like this, do subscribe. I'm going to be doing this again on Sunday with Night Scarab's video. I'm going to be a lot nicer to Night Scarab. One, Night Scarab hasn't acted in the same ways that Dan has. And two, his video is a lot better. Obviously, I'm going to be critiquing it. I'm going to be calling out things that I think are mistaken, but his video is much better than Dan's. It's not just 100% lies. So if you enjoyed this, make sure you tune in for that as well. And I guess that's the stream. So take care, fellas. I'll see you in a couple days. Hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoyed good food with good people. And, peace out, fellas. Drop me a like if you liked it. Leave me a comment.